Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. This is the true crime case of the Griffith family child abuse allegations, as reported by law enforcement and court documents. In the summer of 2025, a discovery at a church camp in Florida would uncover one of the most systematic cases of child abuse the state had seen in years. What started with a single concerning incident would reveal a house of horrors hidden deep in the woods of Columbia County, where 9 children lived in conditions that defied comprehension. This is their story. What would you do if you discovered a child carrying a functioning stun gun at a church camp? It was supposed to be a typical summer day at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints camp in Branford, Florida. Children laughing, playing games, forming memories that should have been filled with joy. But when camp staff discovered one of the Griffith children carrying what appeared to be a toy stun gun, they made a chilling realization. It wasn't a toy at all. This single moment would unravel one of the most disturbing cases of systematic child abuse Florida authorities had seen in years. But this was just the beginning of a story that would expose a family's dark secret hidden deep in the woods of Columbia County. How could a functioning weapon end up in the hands of a child? And what was really happening behind the doors of the Griffith family home? Brian Griffith, 47, and his wife Jill, 41, appeared to be a devoted family committed to helping children in need. Along with their biological children, 21-year-old Dallin and 19-year-old Liberty, they had opened their home to adopted and foster children, creating what seemed like a large, loving household. The family had recently relocated from Arizona to a remote mobile home in Fort White, Florida, a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom residence nestled deep in the woods, 35 miles northwest of Gainesville. Built in 2001 and purchased just months before the horror was discovered, this isolated location would become the center of unimaginable cruelty. 9 children called this place home, 5 biological to Brian and Jill, and 4 who had been adopted through a private process in Arizona. Their ages ranged from 7 to 16 years old, children who should have been experiencing the safety and love of family life. But what was the reality behind this seemingly charitable family's closed doors? Before we continue, I just want to say, real stories like this take time to research, verify, and tell responsibly. Do me a quick favor, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep uncovering the truth together. Your support truly makes a difference. When that stun gun was discovered at church camp, it triggered something far more significant than anyone initially realized. The discovery prompted a mandatory reporter at their local church, someone legally required to report suspected child abuse, to voice growing concerns about the Griffith children. The church employee had been observing troubling patterns. According to arrest warrants, they noted that the Griffiths primarily foster or adopt African American children and expressed deep concerns that these foster/adoptive children are being treated unfairly. Even more alarming was the revelation that none of the foster or adopted children are familiar with their last names or basic personal information. Children who didn't know their own birthdays. Children who couldn't tell you their full names. What kind of systematic isolation creates this level of disconnection from one's own identity? When Brian Griffith was confronted about the stun gun, he insisted it was just a fake toy. But investigators would soon prove it was very real, just like the abuse that was about to be uncovered. The church's concerns triggered a wellness check that would reveal a scene investigators were not prepared for. When Department of Children and Families investigators arrived at the Griffith home on July 3, 2025, they witnessed something that immediately raised red flags. The scene was stark in its inequality. While the biological Griffith children were playing and watching television, the adopted children were working on chores. This wasn't just a case of age-appropriate responsibilities. This was a clear, visible demonstration of a two-tiered system within the same household. One set of rules for biological children, another entirely for those who had been adopted or fostered. But this was only what could be seen on the surface. What investigators would uncover next would shock even seasoned child welfare professionals. What happens when a family operates like a feudal system, with some children treated as family and others as servants? The answer lay in the darkest corners of this isolated home. As investigators dug deeper, the children began to reveal the systematic torture they had endured. The most shocking discovery was the makeshift cages constructed underneath bunk beds. Brian Griffith had screwed pieces of plywood to create prison-like enclosures where children were locked for hours, sometimes entire days and nights. One 14-year-old boy told investigators he was routinely locked underneath a bunk bed, trapped in this plywood cage for the majority of each day and night. He was only released for lunch and dinner, and occasionally when he wants to play. Imagine being a child, trapped in a space so small you can't stand up, waiting through the long night hours to be freed for basic human needs. The boy revealed that if he needed to use the bathroom at night, he would have to hold it until the next morning when he was finally freed from underneath the bunk bed cage. This wasn't punishment for specific infractions. This was their daily reality. But the physical confinement was just one element of their systematic abuse. The Griffith family had developed a sophisticated system of punishment that went far beyond typical discipline. Children were beaten with canes, but Brian Griffith was reportedly careful not to leave a mark on his victims, suggesting a calculated awareness of avoiding detection. Jill Griffith had her own method of torment, forcing children to lie on the floor while she placed a sheet of plywood on top of their bodies and pressed down, causing pain and splinters to pierce their skin. Perhaps most bizarre was the vinegar punishment. When the adults wanted to discipline the children, they would spray vinegar directly into their faces. A burning, humiliating assault that left no physical evidence but created lasting psychological trauma. The children were also given non-prescribed medication, though the nature and purpose of these substances remain part of the ongoing investigation. What drives individuals to develop such creative methods of cruelty? And how does an entire family become complicit in systematic abuse? Beyond the physical abuse lay something equally devastating: the systematic denial of education and identity. The children were not provided adequate schooling and were unable to read or write. A 14-year-old girl described herself as illiterate, claiming she hadn't been to school in years. One 14-year-old boy told investigators he was uneducated, was in the 4th grade, and didn't know his birthday. These weren't children with learning disabilities. These were children deliberately kept ignorant as part of their abuse. The Griffiths had instructed all the children to lie about what was happening in their home, creating a wall of silence that allowed the abuse to continue undetected. This wasn't just physical abuse, it was the systematic destruction of these children's ability to advocate for themselves or even understand that they deserved better. How do you rob a child not just of their childhood, but of their very sense of self? The Griffiths had found a way. During the investigation, authorities discovered something that made the case even more heartbreaking: evidence of attempted escape. A 10th foster child who had lived with the family was found safe in Arizona with their biological parents. This child had moved to Florida with the Griffiths in 2024, but had managed to call their biological mother, begging to come get her. The mother had successfully rescued her child from the Griffith home, But this escape had revealed even darker secrets. According to court documents, this child's biological mother accused at least one of the Griffith adults of sexual assault on one of the children. The layers of abuse were even deeper than investigators had initially realized. One child's successful escape had potentially saved not just herself, but blown open the case that would save 8 others. Perhaps most disturbing was the involvement of Brian and Jill's adult biological children. Dallin, 21, and Liberty, 19, were not passive witnesses to the abuse, they were active participants. Both adult children were charged with aggravated child abuse, indicating their direct involvement in the systematic torture of their adopted and foster siblings. According to arrest warrants, one foster child specifically accused Dallin of sexual assault. What environment creates young adults who participate in the abuse of children they should have protected as siblings? The Griffith home wasn't just failing the adopted children, it was creating a generation of abusers. This wasn't a case of parents hiding abuse from their children. This was a family culture where cruelty was normalized, where biological status determined your worth, and where even young adults participated in unspeakable acts. The investigation revealed that the abuse wasn't random. It was systematically targeted based on the children's status in the family. Biological children played and watched TV, while adopted children worked. Biological children knew their names and birthdays, while adopted children were kept ignorant of basic personal information. This wasn't just neglect or even typical abuse. It was the creation of a caste system within a single household. The adopted children, predominantly African American according to court documents, were treated as a separate, inferior class of people. The Griffiths had created their own twisted version of a plantation system, where some children were family and others were property. How do we understand a mindset that can love some children while systematically destroying others under the same roof? When the Columbia County Sheriff's Office began their formal investigation following the church's concerns, the evidence mounted quickly. Child Protection Team investigators interviewed all 9 children before making arrests, carefully documenting years of systematic abuse. The children's testimonies painted a picture of daily terror, educational deprivation, physical torture, and psychological manipulation. Each interview revealed new layers of the family's systematic cruelty. On July 22, 2025, all 4 adults were arrested and charged with aggravated child abuse. They were booked into the Columbia County Detention Facility, with bonds set at $500,000 each, though court records showed Jill Griffith's bond was later increased to $1.5 million, suggesting additional charges or evidence of greater culpability. After years of silence enforced by fear and manipulation, the children finally had voices that were being heard. All 9 children were immediately removed from the home under a Florida Department of Children and Families court order. For the first time in years, these children were safe from the daily terror that had defined their lives. The rescue revealed the full scope of educational neglect. Children who should have been in high school were functionally illiterate, children who didn't know their own birth dates, children who had been deliberately kept ignorant of the most basic facts about themselves. The physical evidence supported every horrific detail the children had shared. The plywood cages under the bunk beds, the implements of punishment, the evidence of systematic medication administration. What does recovery look like for children who have had their very identities stripped away? The healing process would be as complex as the abuse had been systematic. The Griffith case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our systems designed to protect children. How did a family systematically abuse 9 children for years without detection? How did educational neglect go unnoticed when children couldn't read or write? The case also raises questions about the adoption and foster care systems. The Griffiths had successfully adopted children through private processes, presenting themselves as a loving family willing to help children in need. They had passed whatever screenings were required, had been deemed suitable parents, and had been entrusted with the most vulnerable children in society. What red flags were missed? What systems failed these children before they even arrived at the Griffith home? The geographic isolation of the family's home certainly played a role. Hidden deep in the woods, 35 miles from the nearest city, the Griffiths had created their own kingdom where normal social oversight was minimal. In the end, it was the community around these children that saved them. A church employee who took their mandatory reporting responsibilities seriously. Camp staff who didn't dismiss a weapon as just a toy. Investigators who saw inequality and dug deeper. A biological mother in Arizona who listened when her daughter begged for rescue. The Griffith case reminds us that child abuse thrives in silence and isolation. It survives when communities fail to ask hard questions, when systems prioritize appearances over reality, and when those with power to protect children choose to look away. But it also shows us the power of speaking truth. One child with a stun gun. One concerned church employee. One welfare check. Sometimes that's all it takes to save lives. As this case moves through the legal system, the 4 adults await trial on charges of aggravated child abuse. If convicted, they face years in prison for their systematic torture of children who had already survived whatever trauma led them into the foster care system in the first place. The 9 children, now safe, begin the long process of healing, learning to read, discovering their own birthdays, and perhaps most importantly, learning that they are worthy of love and protection. In a case filled with so much darkness, their survival itself is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of a community that refuses to look away when children need protection. The ongoing legal proceedings will determine the fate of the 4 adults charged in this case. But for 9 children, the most important verdict has already been delivered. They are safe, they are valued, and they will have the chance to reclaim the childhoods that were stolen from them.
If this case gripped you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime.